Kingdom Hearts 358 over 2 days seriously deserves a remake. A redo, a do-over, whatever you want to call it, because remastered cutscenes ain't gonna cut it. Meme title aside, Days, which is just what I'll call it from now on, often pops up as one of the highlights of the series for its story, and for good reason. It's definitely the standout element, and is still a game that's very nostalgic for me, especially the ending. It's also one of the only games that I've ever pre-ordered, so it's no surprise that it got the movie treatment. I had recently made a video discussing why Recoded deserved more than what it got in the collection, and its predecessor Days is in the same boat. There's still quite a bit you're missing out on with only getting to watch the cutscenes. New enemies, new areas, new keyblades, and plus it's full of unique banter with the organization members. A lot of these details are lost through the movie treatment, unfortunately. It also lost some of that emotional impact for me because I wasn't invested in any gameplay. So in this video, I wanted to talk about what I think a Days remake would need, because in my opinion, it needs to happen, but it would need some work. If you happen to find this interesting, then make sure to leave a like on the video, it'll really help me out. Anyways, let's get on with it. So what do I think needs fixing for a Days remake? Well, for starters, the combat should be reworked. I'll admit, it's better than I remembered, but in my opinion, of the two DS games, Days is the weaker one when it comes to its gameplay, and is probably one of the weakest in the series, if I'm being honest. I get it, this is something I keep bringing up, the flow, the pacing, but seriously, it is important, and it's noticeably off in this game. I feel like no matter how well you might adjust the other aspects of the game, if the core combat doesn't feel right, it really won't matter much. It feels kind of loose and flat, it's lacking that snap, and it feels like it's pretty easy to whiff attacks. And I think that has to do in part with the various keyblades, each keyblade having vastly different swing animations and different combo lengths lead to the game feeling a bit more button mashy. So as you're trying to figure out the rhythm needed to properly do a combo and giving up and just mashing away, because that mostly works anyway, is overall missing that fluidity and precision. I really love the variety and designs of some of the keyblades this game has, and would hope we get to see them again in a future game, but all the different types of attacks I do think lead to the combat lacking consistency and reliability. Maybe pull back and stick to more familiar or easy to reach 3-hit combos as the base, with modified attacks being customizable after the fact. Another notable issue that I feel ties to the combat is enemy behavior. It feels out of sync with what control you have over your character, like having flying enemies that move or warp away constantly, having enemies that nudge away from you or move faster than you can realistically keep up with. Your attacks just don't seem to really connect with the enemies well, so you'll be swinging while the enemies will just kind of casually dance away from you. This game also has the issue of having enemies that don't consistently stagger, or just seem to have high resistance to staggering. Some seem to have sporadic movements and attacks as well, and it seems like they're on a different level of reaction, and it doesn't allow you to really get into a rhythm with the combat. It's more like you're just whacking spongy tanks with a stick that just swat you away out of annoyance. I'd really like to see enemies be more reactive to our hits and possibly not be so jumpy. It's not impossible, but some Heartless and bosses especially do become really tedious to deal with, and it isn't well suited for the control you have over your character in this game. With how the game is currently, I think Kingdom Hearts 3's level of control would probably be more appropriate. But these would be my main areas of concern that I'd want to see fixed. Next, I want to talk about the mission objectives and structure. Some of the mission types are just straight up boring. I'm talking about you Dark Globs and recon missions that literally just had you blindly running around hoping for a prompt to appear. There are actually quite a few investigation style missions. It's just that they're not always fun, but I do like the idea though. There are also those occasional stealth segments and emblem collectathons, so there was quite a bit of variety, but needless to say, there were plenty of missions that I'd rather just skip. Maybe if there was some way to maybe streamline these missions, compound them into single outings, letting you complete multiple in one trip, or just find some way to make them more engaging. Because, again, conceptually I think they're pretty cool and fit with the vibe of the game, but aren't necessarily enjoyable. Another issue I had back in the day is that while the game was made for a handheld, sometimes the missions didn't really line up with that, I thought. Like, initially it seemed like the missions were going to be short and sweet, but after a while it felt like some missions became longer and more drawn out and would have benefited having an actual controller to use, especially if those missions turned out to be a boss fight. You know, like, it wasn't always clear when you'd be setting out on a boss fight, or if it would just be a group of strong enemies that would eat up your time. Some of the boss fights in this game too. Oh boy. Now I definitely have to talk about this, and this is drop or rework the panel system. It has some neat ideas, but it is way too limiting. Having to consciously dedicate spots on your grid for your basic abilities like guard and dodge rolling really sucks. I did briefly mention it in the other video, but also having to equip individual casts of magic really wore on me. Like, come on now. Especially considering how powerful and necessary magic can be in this game. Casting magic, I noticed, proved to be way more effective than trying to land combos on a lot of enemies after a while. So not having a reliable way to regain it after you run out of items is pretty frustrating. So perhaps bring back the MP bar for this game, or at least introduce an ability that lets you earn magic cast passively without ethers. Also, they were nasty for only letting you equip a single ring, and were doubly nasty for not letting you change your equipment after you've started a mission. I'd say either drop this entirely in favor of a more traditional Kingdom Hearts equipment menu, or maybe increase the size of the grid to make it less restrictive, and allow you to have more equipment. And if they did this, please let us change our panels after we've started a mission. Next, I want to talk about mission and challenge mode. It's pretty apparent that the mission mode and challenges were a bit bare bones, especially playing solo like I was. It definitely feels more like just a way to pad out playtime once you got closer to endgame. Having more defined details of what your goal is would be great for challenge mode, I think, so you're not having to just like guess what exactly you need to improve on. But if they don't feel like doing any of that, then at the very least, they should add online multiplayer for the mission mode. Now, this is just, it's so obvious, like, seriously. We are all thinking it. It's a shame being given such a sizable roster of playable characters to try out, having playable organization members, among others, for PvE missions is so cool. And at least for me, never getting the opportunity to actually experience it with other people, being able to have this updated and playable online would be so sick. Getting to actually play as or alongside these previously inaccessible characters, getting to see how they might control, getting to play with their weapons, and even seeing fun alternate designs for them as well. I wouldn't be opposed to just having this being released as a standalone game. I guess I'm just going to be blunt here. Days was an interesting first try, but undeniably awkward. Yeah, let's go with awkward. And what I've realized revisiting this game is how unique it was in its own right. Also how much of it got carried over and improved upon for Recoded. But I would say it's still deserving of a second chance outside of its narrative. It's just that its awkward growing pains sometimes got in the way. Like, for any of y'all who've already played this game, you probably have some ideas of what I'm hinting at. Where it's like, oh, this looks really cool, a cool looking enemy, a unique looking boss fight, and then you're actually trying to engage with it, and it's like, what's going on here? And these sort of got in the way of my overall enjoyment of the game just a little. Ironically, Days doesn't deserve a remake because it was some underrated gem of a game, like Recoded is, but rather because of its flaws. Because it's a game with untapped potential. Because it's a game that didn't always quite hit the mark, in my opinion. But honestly, what I expect if we were to get a Days remake is literally the same game, touched up, more detailed models, and no online multiplayer, which, I mean, okay. I would probably still buy it if I'm being real here. It is not a bad game, that's not what I'm saying. The only reason why I seem to be complaining about it is because I'm very nostalgic for it. It does mean a lot to me. Rather, I'm saying it's a game that would have benefited from having extra work done to it to really help it excel. Kinks and quirks that definitely needed smoothing out, and now that we can better reflect on them in hindsight, and are no longer restricted by technical limitations of the DS. But that's just my opinion. Comment your thoughts on a Days remake. What do you think it would need? Anyways, I'll catch you on the next video. Bye! Bye bye.